Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many faces. It's now 8:30 a.m. and I think it's time for us to begin our program. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am Lisa Kimball. I'm the CEO of the Arc of Loudoun. I'm the immediate past chair of the Loudoun Chamber, and I am honored to serve as the chair of the Chamber's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Initiative. I identify as a white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. I'm honored to introduce and to work with the vice chair of the DEI initiative, Angela Mitchell, a brilliant friend who generously shares her wisdom with us. We are so blessed to have her. Shout out to all of our DEI initiative committee members and to the chamber staff. Thank you all so much, each and every one of you, for bringing this vision to life. And most especially this morning, big thanks to all of our attendees. Your presence this morning brings great hope to the cause. We are committed to building and maintaining a diverse, equitable, and inclusive business environment in Loudoun County, and we strive to become a civic model for the implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies that advance education, innovation, and economic growth across Northern Virginia. You know, it seems that we've reached another American watershed moment, one in which the racism and inequity, which have long simmered below the surface in our justice system, in our schools, and in our workplaces, is hopefully, finally, destined for the trash heap. Maybe all of this feels new to you. Maybe you, as I, have directly experienced intentional exclusion or inequitable treatment as an employee based on the color of your skin or your gender or your religion or your culture, or maybe you faced a particularly challenging employee management problem where race or some other difference came into play. An informal poll shows that many, perhaps most organizations have reached a point where addressing these issues is long overdue. Some business leaders have gained the wisdom to truly understand that only when diverse perspectives are included, respected, and valued can we start to get a full picture of the world and, in particular, of our businesses, who we serve, what customers and employees need, and how to successfully meet people where they are. For those of us who aren't so woke yet, or who work for companies that are steeped in traditions of bias, beginning the journey toward confronting these challenges head on, having these crucial conversations, even on a micro scale, can be fraught with peril. And that is where the Loudoun Chamber's DEI initiative comes in. With the goals of education and gentle insistence on change, we, together, will learn how to progress toward a more just world. I'd like to take a moment now to level set some vocabulary for today's program. Diversity. Asking about people's physical, social, and ethnic backgrounds is really not that new in business, equal employment opportunity stuff, if you will. The reasons that questions of race and disability, while optional, are asked on most job applications is to attempt to minimize, dare I say, eliminate discrimination. So for today's purposes, we'll say that diversity equals differences. Inclusion, of course, is really just that, to take in, to consider something or someone to be part of a group. We'll be chatting today about what has been and what could be done to minimize unintentional exclusion and to maximize intentional inclusion. And then we get to equity. Equity has to do with fairness, sure, but that definition is a bit reductive for today's conversation. Perhaps the best way to explain our use of the term equity is in its relation to the word equality. Let's talk houseplants. I've got a green thumb. Let's talk houseplants. Equal care means that each plant gets the same amount of sun, water, and the exact same soil. Equitable care means that each plant gets what it needs. The cactus gets lots of sun, a little bit of water, and a nice sandy soil. The peace lily gets some shade, plenty of water, and loamy soil. Each plant thrives when it receives what it needs, which is not necessarily the same as what's best for other plants. So let's put all of that together. Our purpose in bringing today's program to our members is to increase awareness of the value that all businesses gain when we work to make diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities at all levels. And we're proud to be able to present this discussion featuring national and regional experts on DEI. We'll begin by learning about a national effort by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to drive business and policy solutions that remove the barriers that race has historically played in preventing people from fully realizing the American dream. We'll follow that discussion with a panel of experts who will generously share their personal experiences and their professional expertise to help each of us better understand how and why to implement more effective DEI policies, programs, and practices. Please know, though, that this event is not intended to be a one-way presentation. We've reserved time for Q&A with our audience during the program, so please do not be a passive participant in this conversation, either this morning or at any time in the future. Boldly share your questions with experts, those here today, and those who will always be available to you through the Chamber at any time, and they will offer their honest answers. In the wise words of Brené Brown, daring leaders fight for the inclusion of all people, opinions, and perspectives because that makes us all better and stronger. That means having the courage to acknowledge our own privilege and staying open to learning about our biases and our blind spots. It is also about listening, centering, and honoring stories that reflect experiences that are different from our own. And that's all about today's program: listening, honoring, learning. And speaking of daring leaders, it is now my great privilege to introduce our first guest. Rick Wade is a Senior Vice President of Strategic Alliances and Outreach at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Rick develops and implements programs and initiatives to help the Chamber create new business relationships and partnerships across diverse audiences. He also provides counsel on policy issues and leads special projects. Among the initiatives that Mr. Wade helps steer for the U.S. Chamber is the one that he's engaged in this morning, the Equality of Opportunity Initiative, which seeks to leverage America's free enterprise system to help create necessary social change to address racial injustice. We are so honored to have him here right now. I will fully admit that I am a big fangirl. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rick Wade.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for allowing me to be with you this morning to talk about this very, very important issue of inequality in America and our efforts at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, along with so many other state, local chambers across the country, to engage in what we call the equality of opportunity. You know, I am originally from South Carolina, so I grew up in the South, even though I live in Washington, D.C. now. And I was just thinking a few weeks ago, reflecting on some 57 years ago, when 250,000 or more Americans convened right here in our nation's capital of Washington for that historic March on Washington, punctuated by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. But you know, often overlooked in that speech over a half century is the fact that the full name of that gathering was actually the March on Washington for Jobs and for Freedom, with a really heavy focus on closing the stark economic gap, the gap in unemployment, prosperity, and economic opportunity between white and Black Americans. More than a half century later, while we have made some progress and progress we've made, that stark gap still remains. And the work to close it remains as important as urgent as ever before. Still today, the opportunity to obtain an education, to secure a job, to start a business, or provide for your family is quite frankly determined still by the color of your skin. For decades, Black unemployment rates have been consistently twice as high as white unemployment rates. Black students are twice as likely to attend high poverty schools than their white peers. And Black business owners still struggle to access capital and funding for their businesses and their ventures. Additionally, sadly but true, Black Americans are more likely than whites to be arrested, to be convicted, sentenced, making it more difficult and sometimes impossible to re-enter the job market and build a new and better life. A recent report by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in partnership with MetLife found that minority business owners have been disproportionately hit hard in the recent months as a result of COVID-19. All of our small businesses have, but minority businesses disproportionately, some 66% of Black and minority businesses in the country are concerned about permanently closing. So I mentioned that just to say that the pandemic, the historic inequalities that have existed, which one of our partners, the Kellogg Foundation, I think was spot on in a partnership we have with Kellogg and around their business case for racial equity, which I'll talk about in a moment. They reminded us that the persistent racial disparities that we see today, they did not happen by accident. They arose from a long history of deliberate policies based on race, and they've been perpetuated by biases that remain. And the reality is that systemic inequalities hurt individuals, hurt communities, hurt our economy, and hurt our society. We've all witnessed the murder of George Floyd firsthand. We watched the social unrest play out across our country. All of that combined with, again, the pandemic and the corresponding economic crisis has thrust all of these issues into the national spotlight again. And the country is now at a turning point. And so we believe at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that it's finally time for policymakers and business leaders to capitalize on this moment and work to enact real change to ensure that the enduring inequality of opportunity that was rooted in race and racial bias remains a thing of the past. So back in the early part of June, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce convened business and corporate and civic leaders and policymakers in a historic conversation called Inequality of Opportunity Town Hall. Our chairman and CEO, Tom Donahue, participated, Suzanne Clark, the president of the chamber, people like AT&T chairman Randall Stevenson, Dr. Wayne Frederick, the president of Howard University, my very good personal friend Gail King of CBS News participated in the dialogue, the Kellogg Foundation, even individuals like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the legendary NBA player, not for his athletic history and being a sports legend, but his work around STEM education, and so many others. We gathered over 6,000 people representing business and industry primarily in this national conversation. And we were thrilled that over 500 state and local chambers and other business groups and organizations, including all of the diverse chambers, the Hispanic chambers and the Black chambers and LGBTQ chambers, that we all convened together to have a dialogue, to listen and to learn from each other, and to put forward a national agenda on how we can work together to address what we call equality of opportunity. And I want to tell you just a little bit more about that. Next slide. I think Suzanne Clark, the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, said it best. And here's what she said: as our nation undertakes a necessary conversation about systemic racism, we will listen thoughtfully and lead solutions to help ensure Black Americans and people of color have greater opportunities to succeed in the American enterprise system. Next slide. And why does this matter? Because we believe that all Americans should have equal opportunity to earn their success, to rise on their merit, and live out their own American dream. But that, again, is not the case today. One of the things that we began with when we began this work was to root our work in data and research. We have a treasure trove of data at uschamber.com, Equality of Opportunity Initiative, around 4 areas that we decided to primarily focus on: unemployment, education, criminal justice, and entrepreneurship. And we're now adding 2 additional pillars to this work around health and wealth, understanding obviously the tremendous disparities that exist in the area of health, as well as the widening wealth gap that exists between Black Americans, white Americans, and other people of color. And just to point out a few of these facts, and I won't go through all of them, but here's one. On the entrepreneurship, on the side, Black Americans represent some 12% of the labor force, but only 9.4% of business owners. And incidentally, there are 2.6 million Black-owned businesses in our country. Most of them are sole proprietors, small businesses, 1 employee. Some maybe 2 or 3 employees. And again, the reality that 66% of them could close is absolutely unconscionable. They're not just job creators and business owners, but these small businesses are very important anchors in our communities. I grew up in an area of South Carolina, Lancaster, South Carolina, during the days of legal segregation. But I remember an area in Lancaster called the Hill. It is where Black business owners gathered. And they were not just business owners, but they were role models. They were anchors. They are part of the social fabric of our society. And we're working very hard to work with these companies, not only to keep them open, but create more opportunities for them to grow and expand. American Express leaned in with us and our foundation, and we've launched now the Black Business Coalition, where American Express has provided some $10 million to provide immediate grants to these businesses, small grants, $5,000, $10,000, just to keep the doors open. And then we're working with them to provide the technical assistance they need to build banking relationships and other matters in a long-term way to strengthen these enterprises across our country. And then when you look at areas like education, let me go back. In the area of education, Black students are twice as likely to attend high poverty schools than their white peers. Math scores for Black students entering kindergarten are 21% lower than those of white students. Only 1 in 5 Black 4th graders are reading on grade level compared to half of their white student peers. This is extremely important as we think about the workforce of the future, and not to mention the importance of technology and STEM. And so we got to acknowledge this data and the reality of where we are. It's been said that what measure gets done. And that's why a lot of our work has been rooted in data. And by the way, we're now working to do the same type of data state by state so that you can have access, in this case, to the data in the state of Tennessee to drive and inform your decisions and efforts around addressing inequality in the state of Tennessee. On the workforce part, I mentioned unemployment earlier, but Black Americans represent 12% of the workforce, but only 9% are in high earning management and professional positions. And we're working with companies across America to address this issue of workforce diversity, which I'm sure we'll talk in more specificity later. But that's not only in the workforce in terms of frontline employees, but how do we think about diversity and advancement of opportunities at the C-suite level, even on corporate boards? And we're working diligently to work with companies to create best practices in the area of workforce. And then in the area of criminal justice, which I referenced earlier, that 27% of arrests and 40% of persons incarcerated are African American, more than double and triple their proportion of the American population. And this is an extremely important area that obviously is front and center, because as these individuals re-enter our society, our challenge must be to make sure that they become productive citizens again, And I'll talk a moment about some of the prescriptive solutions that we're advancing in the area of criminal justice. Now, this is extremely important. Why really does this matter? We understand the moral imperative for diversity and inclusion and equality, but there's also a very sound business case. Our partnership that I mentioned earlier with the Kellogg Foundation around what they call the business case for racial equity is very simple, but yet obviously it is complicated to execute. Here's what Kellogg, in a tremendous research report, and I would suggest that you can find this report on the W.K. Kellogg Foundation website, the business case for racial equity, that if we address these inequalities, some of the inequalities I discussed earlier, they move even in the area of housing, looking at all of the inequalities, that our economy, our GDP, grows by some $8 trillion nationally. That is an economic imperative. It is a win-win, not just for business, but for industry, for our society, for our economy. And then on the point of diversity and inclusion, the research is very clear around the business case. Whether it's McKinsey, Deloitte, and other firms who've done tremendous research in the area of diversity and inclusion, that organizations, businesses that are more diverse and inclusive are simply more profitable. For every 10% increase in racial and ethnic diversity, for example, on a company's senior executive team, earnings before interest and taxes rise by 0.8%. There's mounting evidence, obviously, that greater diversity also leads to a healthier workplace culture and better business outcomes. So we know the business and economic case, and it is from that perspective that we're leading and leaning in on this equality of opportunity initiative. More specifically, what are we doing? There are policy solutions that address these issues that we are really proud of leading at the U.S. Chamber. As many of you know, we engage Congress on a day-to-day basis, being one of the most powerful lobbying organizations in the country. And I'm really pleased now that in our scorecard, as we score members of Congress, we've now included a factor in there around equality of opportunity, making sure that there's accountability on Capitol Hill. So we're introducing legislation. We've already endorsed almost over a dozen pieces of bipartisan legislations and bills that seek to address some of these inequalities. For example, in the area of education, supporting more equitable educational funding, including student-based approaches, expanding K through 12 school choice options, improving K through 12 education accountability, closing the digital education divide, which we've witnessed firsthand, the tremendous gap in the digital divide and broadband access as our children are going back to schools and they have to engage in teleeducation, improving secondary education transparency as well. You can find a list of all of the pieces of legislation that we're advocating for on our website, again, uschamber.com, equality of opportunity. In the employment area, just to mention a few, one of the things also, in addition to policies, there are best practices that business and industry can engage in independent of policy. And so we're working with businesses across America, for example, in the area of employment, promoting more diversity in corporate leadership. We're working with one of our trade associations, the National Association of Corporate Diversity, corporate directors rather, to improve diversity among corporate boards, utilizing data to improve our workforce diversity, promoting investment in opportunity zones and making sure that there are outcomes that are impactful in local communities. Available, quality, affordable childcare is extremely important as we talk about unemployment, and we witnessed that as well as a result of COVID-19 front and center as people go back to work and they can't afford the childcare that they need and the services for their children. And so we're really thrilled about the bills, the legislation that we've introduced, and we look forward to endorsing more legislation in the months to come. And let me be clear about our ability to build bipartisan support, recognizing it's going to take bipartisan support, that these issues shouldn't be about Democrats, Republicans, or independents. It's going to take a whole of society to be able to address the inequalities that exist across our country, our states, and our communities. one of the things that we were adamant about as state and local chambers signed on to the Equality of Opportunity Initiative was that they committed themselves to not only convene in their local communities, which you're doing now, and we're very grateful for that, because we believe that listening and dialogue is the beginning, but the next step is real action and real work. And so we're already seeing states and local chambers across the country not only convene and have dialogue about equality of opportunity, but they're rolling up their sleeves and beginning to present similar pieces of legislation at the state level and the local level. And there is no one size that fits all. And so we're encouraging our state and local chambers across the country to convene, to roll up their sleeves. We believe that together that we can and we must turn this national dialogue into nationwide action. A lot of people have socialized this moment and saying that it feels different. And I certainly believe that it does feel different, but it will only be different if we put forth the effort and the work and work together to reclaim and reaffirm the American promise for equality of opportunity for all people. So with that said, I look forward to this dialogue, taking any questions or providing additional observations on our Equality of Opportunity Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. That was absolutely breathtaking. Everybody, please, round of applause, hands up for Mr. Rick Wade. Thank you all so much. Fantastic. And as Rick had just said, we are now ready to plow into some questions and would love to hear from you. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom. You're also more than welcome to plug some questions into chat. And without further ado, Mr. Wade, we've got our first question for you. Rick, how would you assess the U.S. Chamber's own performance in regards to the diversity and inclusion of its board, staff, and various initiatives?
Well, that's a very good question. This is my third year at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I'm the guy who always says we got to practice what we preach. And we're beginning to practice that. We're not perfect, but we're making progress. Even me at the senior vice president level of the chamber is very significant. And since I've been there, I'm thrilled to say we brought on our board of directors, 3 African Americans. President of Howard University, Dr. Wayne Frederick, an accomplished surgeon, in addition to being president of an HBCU. And we know how important HBCUs are in the South. And he's bringing great perspective. And that's led already to an amazing partnership with historically Black colleges called our Next Gen Business Partnership, which is about aligning HBCUs with the needs of business and industry, not just in terms of talent, which is always, and it should be, where we draw talent for our workforce. But what we're doing also is creating fascinating partnerships between business airmen. But Tuskegee is doing amazing research in the aerospace industry and materials and all kinds of things. And now we're partnering them with business and industry to create long-term sustainable partnerships. Mark Wilson, the president of Chime Solutions, who was just featured on NBC News, who is converting old big box malls, which are now dormant and empty, to call centers, employing Black and Hispanic young people in urban communities. And then a young lady in Texas we brought on our board, who was our small business of the year about 2 or 3 years ago, Zawadi Bryant, for her nighttime pediatric care center. So we're moving forward our diversity. We're in the market now for jobs to help lead our Equality of Opportunity Initiative. We got a ways to go, but I'm really thrilled about the progress that we're making, because we too have to practice what we preach. We believe that diversity matters. Organizations that are more diverse and inclusive are more successful, more profitable, have better outcomes, and we're leading in that way as well within the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. And when we get into the opportunity in the second half of our program to speak with some of our panelists, our chamber chair, Stacy Metcalf, is going to be drilling down with them on exactly how to make those types of things happen within our own organization. So thank you so much. That tees it up perfectly. We have another question for you. Are there policy issues that advance a more equitable and diverse economy that are truly local and state rather than federal issues? And how can local and state-based chambers best work to advance those non-federal issues?
I think that's a really, really good point. And again, I would direct you to our Equality of Opportunity Initiative and agenda, because what we built is a sort of a matrix of what work needs to be done at the federal level versus the state and local level. But at the end of the day, it's all local, because local communities are where people reside. And I think while there's some uniformity, there could be some very distinct efforts and some overlap. For example, I talk about the issue of Black and minority businesses. There is no uniform policy, if you will, on government contracting opportunities for minority businesses. Are there opportunities with local governments to do more to advance supply chain and government contracting opportunities, correspondingly at the state level? So I think you're going to find some overlap, but I think this is also where state and local chambers can really lead and lean in to drive that dialogue and advance some of these policies. State chambers, local chambers, work with city halls, work with state houses, and our ability to be able to convene in a way that expands the table. One of the things I've done also is I'm convening all the diverse chambers and organizations, meeting regularly with now this sort of coalition of Hispanic and Black chambers and women chambers and business group, as well as LGBT chambers, which is actually one of the fastest growing chambers in America. So as you think about the role of a state and local chamber, think about how inclusive you are in engaging these other organizations, because one of the things I found is that our agenda is 70–80% the same. So the extent to which we can create a collective voice that's an inclusive voice, the more likely we'll be successful as we advocate for legislation in the state houses as well as in City Hall.
Fantastic. Thank you once again, Rick. That's really very, very helpful for all of us to know. And one of the comments that we got in the chat, one of the questions is, would you be able to share your slides? Because people are interested in doing a deeper dive into some of the information that you've got there.
I'll be delighted to.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll make sure through the chamber that we get those to all of our attendees. Here's another question for you. Can the Loudoun business and nonprofit leaders that are listening in right now participate in the Equality of Opportunity Initiative? And if so, how? How can we jump in? How can we be a part of it?
Well, and I hope you will. And thank you for that question. Again, the way this works, or the way we envision it, is that while we're driving this nationally, that we want Loudoun County Chamber to convene its own Equality of Opportunity Town Hall. We want Loudoun County to model the same behavior locally, which it means putting forth your own agenda to advance and impact Loudoun County. And so, it's very important that this work cascades down to county and local communities. And the other way that you could get connected to this work is, take advantage. I mean, one of the things that the chamber does very well is researching data around policies. The data that you can find on our website, we call it the Equality of Opportunity Gaps by the numbers, is absolutely amazing. And I think, using that data, again, we're looking to curate that data state by state over the next several months. But inform your work by data, inform your work by the research, and we have tremendous research and data that you should take advantage of. The other thing is we're continuing to convene, which we have tremendous capability, doing over 3,000 events a year and now virtually, but take advantage of some of the forums because they're very informative. I just put together an Equality of Opportunity in the Innovation Economy Forum. These are all free that you can join and participate and hear from experts on a number of myriad of issues. We're going to be doing one soon around equality of opportunity in these clinical trials and what that means as we think about a COVID COVID-19 vaccine? How do we make sure that people of color who've been disproportionately impacted are included and that they understand the importance of the vaccine, considering our history around vaccines in America? So there are a number of issues that we engage in, building forums and seminars, and I would encourage you to participate in and become more informed, and therefore you can lead and lean in on these issues at a local level and tap in some of the resident experts that the chamber brings in across business and industry. And then finally, we're actually building what we call a equality of opportunity town hall initiative in a box, a toolkit that we're looking to roll out soon. So stay tuned for that. Take that toolkit and again, make it work for your local county, your local community.
Outstanding. Once again, thank you. And I can tell you right now, first in line for that toolkit. So please do keep us posted. Let us know when we can grab that. Let's talk a little bit about education in terms of diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion, all of these things. We know that as businesses, we need to find ways to create our own future employees, right? We've got to repurpose employees that we already have due to automation and other reasons, so on and so on and so forth. So what can you tell us about the U.S. Chamber's efforts to advance STEM education, particularly in historically underserved communities, children of color, children of socioeconomic disadvantage? What is the Chamber doing and how can we be a part of that?
Well, I think STEM education is so important, but if you remember the statistics that I referenced, we have to start there. The reality is, I mentioned that only 1 in 5 Black fourth graders are reading on grade level compared to half of their white counterparts. And the numbers are even more stark when you start looking at areas of math scores for Black students entering kindergarten are 21% lower. So we have to start on the education front early on and helping these kids be more competent in the area of STEM, science and mathematics, and those areas that are going to create a pipeline in the future. And then I think creating as many partnerships as we can between business and our schools is extremely important as well. And so there are policy issues that I mentioned earlier. And again, you can find a lot of these laid out on our website. But the business solutions I'm very interested in, and I talked about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, his STEM education program, but there are best practices across the country. And what we're trying to do is bring these best practices all together and create this resource, again, a toolkit for state and local chambers to utilize as you think about new and promising approaches. The Kellogg report that I referenced has a whole education session, a section, and an area that they call promising strategies. And STEM, there's some STEM promising strategies included in the Kellogg report. And we're utilizing, by the way, this Kellogg research in a very big way to inform the work that we're doing. So I think, again, it's going to take a whole of society. I don't know how we do STEM in a way that effectively if we don't deal with the issue of broadband. I mean, so many children right now don't have access to broadband and therefore don't have access to education in this virtual world. So it sounds overwhelming, it sounds complicated, but we have to deal with this nonetheless. And that starts at the earliest level of education and in the area of kindergarten on up. So, working together, I think bringing in new business solutions, making investment in policies that work and that get us to the kinds of outcomes early on will create the pipeline of talent to be able to be competitive for jobs of the future, which if not will be technology jobs, they certainly will be technology enabled jobs. And that's the approach that we're taking.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much and very helpful. So tangential to that, let's pretend for a moment that we've been able to move that needle. We've been able to educate, qualify, certify. We've been able to create the employees that we need for the future of our companies, for our businesses. What about housing? Can you talk for a little bit, please, about what the Chamber is doing and where you are on housing affordability?
Well, this is one, as I mentioned, that we're about to add to our work. We started out with education, unemployment, entrepreneurship, and criminal justice. We're adding wealth, housing, and health. But understanding that housing is fundamental to the infrastructure and strength of these communities. So we've not made the proposal announcements yet that we'll be endorsing, but this is one that we're taking on. And I don't want to get ahead of the direction that we'll be going, but access to affordable housing is extremely important across our country, and it'll be front and center on our agenda as we still dive into that area.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that piece of it. So I'd like to shift gears just a little bit. We're talking about diversity, equity, accessibility, inclusion in business. And most of what we're talking about is for the businesses themselves, for us as employees, for us as employers, where we're going in the future. Let's talk a little bit, please, about our customers. What should we be doing to make sure that we are not unintentionally excluding any potential customer and making sure that we're including every possible customer that we can bring in?
Well, the business case, when we think of business and industry, it is all about your customers. The data shows that just in the Black community alone, that consumers are spending over $1 trillion a year. And we're seeing interesting data that shows that there's a different consciousness now where consumers are asking about diversity. They're more interested in now the value proposition of social responsibility of companies, the diversity, not just in the frontline offices, but on corporate boards and C-suites. So we believe that companies that are more diverse, as I mentioned earlier, and inclusive in their thoughts, in their ideas, in their marketing strategies, are more likely to meet these customers and consumers where they are. So it's very important as you think about your consumers and as you think about your customers, that you think about this from the lens of diversity and inclusion. We all have seen the data. America's changing, and where people of color, according to the data, in year 2040, 2050, will be a majority. And I really believe that it's a matter of competitiveness, that companies that embrace strategies to engage this more diverse consumer and customer base will be more competitive in the future. It is an incredibly important business case to not only to embrace, but to invest in now. Thinking about your marketing strategies, thinking about how you engage your consumers, and thinking about internal facing, that you have the kind of diverse workforce that can speak to the needs, the interests of your consumers, not just today, but their growing needs in years to come. The last piece I'll say to that is, this fascinating trend around young consumers, again, who are demanding that their businesses, the organizations that they support, that they buy from, that they're more socially involved in the issues that are playing out across America, whether it's social injustice, racial inequities, et cetera. So there's just interesting, we talk about ESG, environmental and social and governance, but we're really seeing this play out in some really fascinating ways. And companies that have strong ESG programs, which includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, I think are likely to be more competitive.
All of that makes perfect sense, of course, and thank you so much for sharing your insight. If you don't mind, I'd like to get a little bit personal here. So we've been doing a lot of work at the Chamber. We're adding programs for our members like the Onion Dialogues to be able to start peeling back these layers and having these crucial conversations. And it's uncomfortable. It's tough to be vulnerable. It's difficult to step out of that comfort zone. And it's also a little bit difficult to step out of that protective bubble that we tend to build for ourselves. I know as a woman who spent the vast majority of my career in technology, I was almost always, for most of my career, the only woman in the room. And it changed me enormously. I can't say for the better. I can honestly say that there have been situations where I find myself being far more assertive than maybe I'd like to be. I don't know that I appear as kind as I want to be because I'm trying so hard to make sure that my voice is heard and I've got a seat at the table. So would you mind just telling us a little bit, maybe a personal experience or one that you can relate that you've heard about somebody else, and how that impacted life at work and what steps were taken to try to overcome or change that dynamic?
Well, one of the big, let me answer that by saying, first, give me a snapshot in my own personal story, because one of the things that we have to acknowledge is who we are. And I talk about my own racial DNA, and that's very important, that we come from very sincere, authentic places and create these safe havens where we can be honest and open. I mean, I grew up in South Carolina in a time of legal segregation. I didn't start public education middle school. That was the first time I went to an integrated school. And I'm old enough to remember having sit in the balcony in the movie theaters because that's the only place blacks could sit. Going to a doctor's office, there was a colored room sign and the white side. But I learned from that. And even in 1979, when I ran for vice president of student body in my local school in Lancaster, I had to run on the ballot as vice president black. There was a corresponding candidate, vice president white. The irony was, I'm Rick Wade and his name was Dennis Wade. And we became best friends. And we're still friends today. What a wonderful story. And I say that to say that there's opportunity if we can look beyond these societal barriers and find our common interests. And that's what Dennis and I did. And to this day, we're great friends. And I really think there's something to that in terms of how we approach these conversations. We're leading, our partnership with the Kellogg Foundation is about these courageous conversations. We've been having, and quite frankly, we started this before the pandemic, 36 business roundtables in the states of Mississippi, Michigan, and New Mexico, all designed around how do we have conversations about the business case for racial equity. And one of the things that we're going to publish a report at the end of the year in partnership with Kellogg on our findings, but I'll tell you what we found, that we all understand the moral imperative. But when we talk about the commonality, the common agenda of the business case and the economic impact, what we're finding is that people want to be a part of that change. They want to be a part of it in a more intense way to advance change. And they want to be a part of it in a way where they can feel safe, where they can feel, be authentic in their views and yet see real results. So we know that this can work. And again, I'm of the opinion, if you look at data in the declining confidence of elected officials and other stakeholders, what a rich opportunity for the business community, for businesses in our local communities across the country to lead on this. And even as we think about the social unrest and civil discourse, what another opportunity for business to lead and create, tables that are diverse where we can have conversation about even civil discourse. This is a unique moment, I believe, in our history, and somebody's got to lead. And I think it's incumbent upon the business community, state and local chambers. We have an infrastructure, the U.S. Chamber, our state and local chambers, like any other. And if we can figure this out, we really can transform communities. And that starts with conversation. Not always easy, but I believe if we again find a common agenda that we can work around, we can make progress. We're not going to solve all of these issues in the next month or year or two or 3 years, issues that have existed in our country for 400 years. But it's a good place to start with listening and learning from each other and having candid, honest dialogue in safe places, safe spaces.
Sorry about that. That was the perfect wrap up. Thank you so very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick Wade, thank you so, so much. Talking about daring leaders, talking about listening and learning, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, asking questions and answering them honestly and frankly. It's the only way it's going to happen, right? And we want to see this change. We wish to be the change. And without further ado, speaking of daring leaders, I am going to pass to the indomitable Ms. Stacy Metcalf, who is going to be introducing our panel and taking us into the next part of our program. Thank you so much, Mr. Wade, and here's Stacy.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Stacy Metcalf, as Lisa said, and I am the Director of Government and Community Relations at Inova. I'm proud to serve as the 2020 Chair of the Loudoun Chamber Board of Directors. I am thrilled to have the opportunity to kick off the second part of our program by moderating the panel discussion this morning. Joining me today, we have Charlene Wheelis with Charlene Wheelis, LLC. And Charlene, you can go ahead and start your video and unmute yourself. And I also have our fellow Chamber Board member, Al Garcia with M&T Bank. And also joining us is Marvin L. Jones with the Diversity and Inclusion Factor, LLC. For our audience, we want you all to imagine that we are seated around a table having what I know is going to be a really great discussion on the importance and the advantages of having diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and practices in the workplace. I have some questions that I will propose and then just let the conversation flow, because we are so fortunate to have this esteemed panel that will be sharing their experiences and best practices. So my advice to the audience is for everyone to listen up and to take great notes. Panelists, let's go ahead and start the discussion by having you introduce yourselves and your organizations, and then spending a couple minutes each discussing how you focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in your current roles. We can start with Charlene, and then we'll go to Al, and then we'll go to Marvin.
Great, thank you very much, Stacy. As Stacy said, I'm Charlene Wheelis, and I am the principal of my own firm, Charlene Wheelis, LLC, which is a strategic communications and business advisory. Some of you may know me as the Principal Vice President of Corporate Affairs, of Global Corporate Affairs for Bechtel Corporation. And I left that role in January to both start my own business and to write a book, which comes out in early 2021. And the reason I bring up the book is not a shameless plug, but there's been some talk this morning about women and in the workplace, regardless of race and our own special circumstances or unique challenges that we have. And the book I have coming out in 2021, the short title is You Are Enough. And it's really about minorities and women in the workplace and lessons that I've learned after a 33-year career. So that's a piece of it. Now, how do I look and how do I work with diversity and inclusion now? I really focus, in addition to communications, on racial justice in the workplace. And this really came about organically, really, after the murder of George Floyd, where CEOs and heads of business that I know were calling me and asking me if I could help them with their DE&I programs. And my immediate response was, no, I can't actually. I'm not a DE&I professional, but I am a C-suite executive, and I'd like to talk to you about systemic bias and systemic racism in your workplace. And so that really started that piece of my business, which has grown the fastest. And so I really enjoy going into organizations, working with the leadership and helping them see where they may have bias in their systems and their processes, and then let that inform what they do with their DE&I programs. Thank you.
Go ahead, Al.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. What a beautiful day, huh? Hopefully everybody will get a chance to go outside today and enjoy the day. It's very foggy here in Leesburg, but hopefully you're seeing the sun. But if you're here with me, you're probably seeing the same thing I'm seeing. So, but thank you for joining us today. My name is Al Garcia. I'm the Business Banking Regional Manager for the Virginia market here at M&T Bank. I serve two purposes for the bank here in this market. One, to manage a team of professionals to drive sales, obviously, and the other really is to function as an administrator of the market for strategic change and growth. So let me talk about how through those roles, and I'll differentiate them and why DE&I is so important to me. And how it functions within my sales team in particular. I'll start there. So currently I manage a sales team of about 22 business professionals, business bankers. And probably what I can tell you when you look at the team, and all of you are familiar with DMV market, right? It's very, the demographics in this area are probably some of the most diverse, market in the country. So one of the things that I, effectively did from the very onset is to make sure that my team was representative of the market that we're serving. Because what studies have shown us is that people like to do business with people they like. And in some geographies, they like to do business with people that look like them, right? So we gotta really pay attention to those types of things. So one of the things that I did as a leader, from a sales perspective, and this is pretty early on, is that's always been an initiative of mine. So within the current makeup of my team, I have 8 different nationalities. I have a really, I think it's almost, it's not split, but it's like 44 to 66, the ratio between men and women. So again, the idea really is just to kind of have them look like the community they represent, and and be, so that our customers can feel more welcome. As an administrative manager of the bank, I'm tasked with many things, and a lot of it is strategic growth. And one of the passions of mine here at M&T Bank is really to champion diversity and inclusion and belonging, right? And so one of the very first things that I did is I started the Hispanic Resource Group here in Greater Washington that has now pretty much, we have different chapters throughout the entire M&T footprint. And I'm fortunate enough to represent every one of those groups today. The bank had asked me also to be part of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. And this council really is really responsible for recruiting, retaining, developing, promoting diverse talent. So diversity and inclusion is alive and well in M&T, but I have to agree with Rick. You got to be patient, but you got to do it with purpose and intent, and just stay focused, because there are great opportunities in the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. And Marvin, welcome.
Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for the opportunity to join you all this morning to be part of this panel. I greatly appreciate this opportunity and look forward to spending the next 30-40 minutes conversing with you all as we entertain questions from those who are participating. As mentioned, I'm Marvin Jones, managing partner for TDIF, the Diversity and Inclusion Factor, LLC. And also, I'm a vice president and senior consultant for the Diversity Training Group, which I believe has done some training with the Loudoun County Chamber of Commerce in the past. Mauricio Velasquez is the president of that organization. And I actually got this opportunity because he happened to be on another assignment. So he said, hey, would you be willing to participate? I said, absolutely, I'll be happy to. So thank you again for this opportunity to be with you all. A little bit about my background. I'm retired military. Just less than 2 years ago, I retired from the United States Navy after a 41-year career. Some of you are not even 41 years old, but I spent 41 years on active duty wearing the cloth of this nation, did it proudly. And my last assignment, I was the base commander at Naval Support Activity Bethesda. For those who are in the local area, that's where Walter Reed National Military Medical Center is. Of course, that was in the news very recently, as they had a very special guest there at the hospital. That running that installation, that was my primary responsibility for the last 3 years of my military career, and had the opportunity to interact with, again, the presidents, vice presidents, members of Congress, Supreme Court. All those folks came through there as my clients that I had to be able to facilitate them and their staffs in running that installation. Prior to that, though, I was the Chief Diversity Officer for Navy Medicine. That's a 45,000 member enterprise, and I had the responsibility of training all of our military and civilian personnel who were assigned to military treatment facilities throughout the world. And a job that I learned a lot from. Actually, Mauricio Velasquez and I did that job together, and we had a great time doing it. And so that was my introduction to diversity and inclusion. And after I left that role and went on to jobs of increased responsibility, I still had that passion and kept my foot in the D&I space, and continued to train and to facilitate sessions within the military. As I retired, and before I retired, I was teaching diversity and inclusion, instructing our senior military officers and our senior enlisted folks who are being slated for C-suite roles within Navy medicine. As I retired from the Navy, they asked me, hey, would you like to continue doing this for us? And I said, absolutely, I would love to. And so I continue to do that today, providing training through my LLC, TDIF. So that's been my introduction into the DEI world and how I continue to stay involved today. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this morning. I love the makeup of this panel. So I'm gonna, as I said at my beginning, I'm gonna have a couple like conversation starters, some questions. And again, free for all, we're all gonna just talk, okay? So my first conversation starter is a two-part question that goes like this. Why do you think it's important for US businesses to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion? And can you share your professional experiences or real-world examples of the advantages of businesses having strong DEI practices? Who wants to start us off? Al?
Absolutely. And all related to, from this perspective is I was fortunate enough to, help the Diversity Council present to senior management and throughout the footprint as to the business case, because I think that's what we're talking about, right? And and I'm a simple guy. Those of you who know me, it's I'm a pretty straight shooter, and I like to simplify things to the way that they make sense to me. So hopefully they'll make sense to you. I'm praying that it will. But one of the things for me really is just simple economics. I mean, when you think about it, I'm a banker, and I'm always thinking about economics, obviously. And when I first learned, as to the changing environment of the demographics here in the United States, and understood that the millennials actually in 2020 are expected to be the largest generation, surpassing the baby boomers. I was going, okay, that's kind of cool. But then when I heard that 42% of those millennials are multicultural, that is a game changer for a business case, right? So we got to start figuring out a way to be more effective and really interact with those individuals. And here's, and I'll leave you with just 3 different metrics, and then I'll jump out of numbers, right? Because not everybody likes numbers. If you think about the Asian community, they're expected to reach $1.3 trillion by 2022. The Hispanic community by 2022 is expected to represent 11.1% of the total US buying power. And if that's not impressive enough as to why we need to be focusing on this, the African American buying power in 2017, and I apologize, that was the most current number I pulled, had reached $1.3 trillion. And in 2007, it represented 8.7% of the US buying power. So that to me is a very compelling business case. So I guess from an example of real life practice, I believe that was the second part of the question. For me, really, I'm in the people business as a financial institution, and a lot of you, and I see some of the names under the attendees, you guys are either employed or are running your own business. And one of the things that is super important is really the recruitment of diverse talent. Right? If you want to connect with those numbers or those metrics that I just gave you, you gotta have purpose and intent in the way you're going about your strategic direction for your company. And to me, when you're focusing in those areas and you create a safe and open environment for these individuals, what it will do is you're going to be automatically working on your retention. So just to give you an example, the retention on my team, and I think when we kicked it off, I told you how diverse my small team was, and this is one of 29 teams at M&T Bank, right? So just my little Northern Virginia or Virginia team. The average tenure on my team is 10 years, and one of the things that you really focus is really trying to create an open and safe environment for them, making sure that you're developing them. Right, creating opportunities, training, promoting, and doing those kinds of things. And the biggest thing to me is championing all these individuals so that they can be their best them. Basically, that they can represent the community and they can champion M&T as very proud advocates of our bank. And that's why this diversity and inclusion is so important to me. That's all I have.
That was a lot. Thank you, Al. Charlene, do you want to go?
Sure, I'll jump in here. And I think Al did a great job of stating the business case for diversity. And I'll just add on to that, you know, we sometimes talk about diversity of thought, but I like to think more around diversity of perspectives. And I think if you have an employee population or a leadership team that isn't diverse, then I think you're going to, there's a much greater chance that you're quite frankly going to step your foot into something from the standpoint of just, you don't have the perspective of a diverse team. And we've heard things that have come out broadly, you know, in our society recently where, you know, companies have really made some significant mistakes and had to recall projects or campaigns that they've put out because they just didn't have the sensitivity. And you know, I'm thinking of, there was a shoe company, a clothing company, designer company that spent thousands, if not millions of dollars on a display for a new product that was hugely offensive to Black people. And I remember when I heard about that and I thought, well, don't they have any Black people in their company that would have said to them, this is offensive, before they spent, you know, $50, $100 million on this? To me, that's a pretty darn expensive mistake simply because you don't have a diverse leadership team. You know, I think pulling from some of what Al said and the numbers, if there's anything that we should understand, it's that if you have a company and your leadership team is all white or primarily all white, you are making decisions for a customer base and an employee population that does not exist anymore, right? So you are starting at a very negative place to begin with in business. And then I think the last thing I'll say before turning it over to Marvin is that people, and I think leaders especially, have to understand that this new generation, where Al said will soon be, you know, 40% or so of the population, they are not going to stand for the lack of diversity within their organizations. The diversity is how they make their buying decisions. It's how they make the decisions about where they work, you know, and where they stay, and they will call you out. And I'll give you just one very quick example without stating names because it's in the news these days. You know, I was approached by a company, a gentleman who runs a very well-known advertising agency in the West Coast. And he has been a pillar of the community for quite some time. On an internal meeting with a Zoom internal meeting with about 60 of his employees, they were looking at a new campaign, and he made a racial slur in describing his response to this campaign and why they shouldn't go forward with that campaign. His employees, rather than going through the chains, the process of how you report these things if you're offended by it, they took it to Advertising Age, a magazine. Within a week, the New York Times had it, Texas Monthly had it, the Wall Street Journal had it, and 40% of his clients canceled their contracts with him within 1 week, okay? And this is because of something he said in an internal meeting. So understand, you know, if your employees feel like they are at risk because you don't appreciate, understand, value the differences and that diversity brings, your business is at risk. And this was a very real example. And now this gentleman who had a $200 million business a month ago is scrambling to save his business from going under. So I'll just stop right there and turn it over to Marvin.
Well, Lisa, Charlene, and Al summed it up in the greatest fashion that I could ever imagine. Exactly what I would have said. And just adding to that, the reason businesses want to focus on diversity and inclusion, because again, it can and probably will directly impact your bottom line. oftentimes if you ask your employees, tell me what you know about diversity and inclusion, they say, well, here's what I do know about diversity and inclusion, what they've heard. And if you ask them, tell me what you don't know about diversity and inclusion, they can tell you, well, I don't know this, I don't know that. But if you ask them, tell me what you don't know that you don't know, what can they tell you? Nothing, because we don't know what we don't know. And we have this perception about diversity and inclusion, and it's a misperception. A lot of us hear about it and we think of it as one way. We think it's a bad thing. A lot of people that hear the word diversity, they turn off about it. When really it's more about, as Charlene was saying, about diversity of thought. It's not just about diversity of race and ethnicity and gender and age. It's about diversity of thought, experience, the things that we bring to the organization. It's not about counting heads. It's about making heads count. It's about tapping into the talent and the skills and abilities that every member of your organization brings to the table for the benefit of your mission, to be able to move your bottom line, to be able to impact your organization, make you more productive. And so when we tap into those skills and talent, when we value diversity, when we leverage it, it becomes a force multiplier. It becomes a strategic imperative. It should be a part of the business plan to make sure, as Charlene said, that we're reaching out to that diverse customer base that we look to serve. Because if you're not that diverse, then you are pretty much marginalizing your own organization and your business opportunities. So it's much broader, but in the end, it will impact the bottom line. And that's, of course, if you're in business to make money, that's going to hurt you in the long run.
Stacy,
Oh, go ahead.
if I can just add to what Marvin was saying, Marvin, you couldn't have said it any better, right? As every business, right? Banks are no different. We're all trying to go through these journeys of understanding our customer base. And it was interesting to me that, our bank, that I'm so proud of, it decided to come to this Northern Virginia market, or the Greater Washington market, to really talk to our customers and create focus groups. Because typically they do it around products and services, right? Just the typical stuff. Well, this time they took a different approach, and really we targeted those markets that had a lot of diversity in them. And we brought in all these commercial clients, business clients. And, it was really amazing to me. And I just shook my head when somebody got on a big podium and started talking about this, is they said, one of the key findings that we found when we were talking to our customers is that the reason why they don't come to the branches, or they don't deal with specific people, is because they don't look like them. They don't think like them. They can't associate with them, right? And these are the basic elements of just really human interaction, right? Is how do you create a safe environment when they're feeling welcome, regardless of who you are? So dead on, Marvin. I really love those ending comments. So just that I wanted to share that.
Thank you all. So what we've heard is a case for strong DEI practices. It's simple economics, it's diversity of perspective, expensive mistakes happen by not having diversity, and tapping into diverse talents equals success. So let's now talk about the competitive, both internal and external advantages of a well-built and executed diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And how can businesses, particularly small businesses, benefit from sound DEI policies and practices? And what are the benefits of supplier diversity programs? Who wants to jump in first?
I'll start with this one, since
you.
I think I may have a little bit of a unique perspective. I am certainly a supporter of, obviously, of DE&I programs, but if they were hugely successful, we wouldn't be here right now, right? Because there wouldn't be any need for them. So from my perspective, and I think what we saw on display, we as a society saw on display, is that it doesn't start with diversity and inclusion. It starts with looking at how society's systemic racism and systemic bias has seeped into your organization. And I've talked to plenty of companies, and they'll say, oh, well, we don't have a diversity and inclusion problem. We have this many, we have this, we have this. Well, one, if you can count, you've got too few. I don't care. If you can count, you've got a problem on your hands. Secondly, if your entire leadership team is homogeneous in whatever way it is, you have a systemic problem on your hands. Because if we just assume, and we can, that talent is distributed evenly, how is it that only one group reaches the top? So to me, you really have to start one step back and look at your practices and your policies. And if you say that you treat everybody the same, right? I treat everybody the same. I treat everybody equally. What you've just said is you don't have equality in your business. If you say, oh well, when it comes to people, I don't see color. That's impossible, right? And when you tell people that you don't see color, you tell them that you don't see them, right? And that's really not what this is about, right? This is about righting hundreds of years of systemic oppression. I think what people have to understand is that today the system works exactly the way it was designed to work, to keep a percentage of the population, and primarily the Black population, from becoming successful and from accumulating wealth. So if we want to get equality in our organizations, we want a fair and just company, we've got to start back at what are we doing to make sure we are breaking down those barriers that actually make no sense whatsoever, but that have disenfranchised people for hundreds of years. Yeah, I'll stop there and let the guys who are in business take over from there.
Marvin, do you want to jump in?
Yes, so I bring a different perspective than my colleagues here. Again, I don't have a private practice experience, you might say. As I've mentioned, most of my career has been in the military and not-for-profit approach to things. But I do have a perspective to share on just building DE&I policies and practices into an organization. For all those reasons that Charlene said, spot on. When you miss that opportunity, you wind up having a homogeneous organization that shows, again, that you don't value diversity. But when you do value diversity, you wind up the result being an inclusive staff, a respectful staff, they're respectful to each other, they'll become more engaged, they feel a sense of belonging, and that results in performing at a higher level. And that performance, of course, enhances your business opportunities and puts your company in a better position. And so those are the things I think that are so important in making sure that you have sound benefit DEI policies and practices that really can translate into stronger performance for your organization.
You know, Marvin just dropped the mic. I think that was that was very well said. You know, when you think about the competitive advantages, and I'll put it from a, I've been managing a small business banking strategy my entire business banking career. My job is to help the small business community, right? And one of the things that kind of resonates with me as I see some of the most diverse companies is, when you start talking to the business owners and you see the makeup of their team, it's really amazing to me. Those that are extremely successful really have a lot of diversity within their team, right? Because they're basically geared to represent the markets that they serve. So for me personally, as I'm dealing with these different customers, they are now my customers. And one of the things that's really important to me, and you heard me at the very beginning again, and people are our biggest assets from a competitive advantage, right? If you're taking care of your people, if you're creating a safe environment for them, if you listen to them, right? Just those basic elements, they're going to stay with you longer. And in the long run, that's really going to help you, from at the bottom line, because you're not spending all this money recruiting, retraining, and repeat, right? So you have a very, very effective workforce. Externally, quite frankly, again, it's the bottom line. Is one of the things, and I love that Charlene brought the issue up that, the systems are set up the way they are. It's going to be a slow process to change them. But we got to start, and we got to be yelling from the top of our lungs. It's like, we need to make change. Because I can tell you, here at M&T Bank, that's one of the areas that we're really zeroing in on, right? Is get the makeup and the self-identification of our bankers, and really try to make sure that we're taking those that are very talented and creating different opportunities. But it doesn't stop there. Create environments for everybody where they feel welcomed. And we created, chapters. I think we have, if I remember correctly, something like 60 chapters throughout the bank with different representations and things of that nature, so that people have a forum where they can go to with people that look like them and think like them, right? So I think that's super important. And really the bottom line, I think every study that I've read basically said, and one would question the metrics and the numbers, right? Because everybody comes with different metrics on this, but I think one of the latest ones that I said that when you have a management on the senior executive level that's diverse, they tend to outperform the non-diverse members by a multiplier of 2 times. 2 times. That's huge, right? And again, it's the devil's in the details when you look at those things. But it's a compelling case to have a good internal program, and that actually is going to be work through the external, through the D&I in terms of supplier diversity programs and the whatnots. If you're properly represented, if you're self-identifying, and I think the Chambers actually is starting to do a really good job of that, I think that puts you in the front of the line for set-asides, for things of that nature, especially if you're going after business, to do projects with larger companies. Those are some of the things that larger companies are looking at. I can tell you here at M&T Bank, we have a supplier diversity program that we're zeroing in on the makeup of your employees. We want to know what they look like, who they represent, and things of that nature. And that's how we're making a good portion of our decisions when it comes to that. And when you talk to Dominion Power and all these large corporations, they're no different than we are, right? So that's the advantage of executing the D&I program, and that's how it's going to affect you in the bottom line.
Thank you all. Oh, go ahead. Is there somebody else wanting to speak? Okay, my key takeaways from this question is first look at and see if systemic bias is seeped into the organization. Also, team members. We all have to remember team members are the most important assets, and valuing diversity equals a sense of belonging and translates into stronger performance. And diverse talents equals success. I said that from the first question. And I'm glad, Al, that you touched on the fact that small businesses need large businesses. So larger businesses looking at the benefits of supplier diversity programs, like that's essential to kind of keep our economy flowing, those small, medium, and large businesses. So thank you for addressing that. We have 8 minutes for my last question. And so we're just going to throw it out there. What are the elements of effective DEI initiatives? And what are common mistakes that businesses make when creating DEI policies and programs? We talked a little bit about it, but do you guys want to go a little deeper on that? Marvin, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you, Lisa. First and foremost, I would say it starts at the top. D&I is a leadership issue. If the leadership is not engaged, I don't care how much window dressing you put on, I don't care how many policies and you thought that if the front office is not supporting it, the C-suite is not supporting it, it's gonna die on the vine. When I was the base commander, when I was the CEO of Naval Support Activity Bethesda, the 17,000 employees worked there. There's no question in their mind where I stood on this matter because they saw me out front leading. And those people, my leadership team, they were engaged. If you're gonna be part of this team, here's our message, here's our mission. I need everyone, all hands on deck. And so they had to make sure that they were engaged as well. So we had to know that the leadership was engaged and the staff saw that and they get them engaged. And then we had to make sure we incorporated equality and equity into our organization, that we build a culturally competent climate where, again, inclusiveness was a part of the mission. And I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit and give the opportunity for my colleagues to say something. When we talk about making sure we do it right, that is so important as well. Too often, as Lisa kind of alluded to, sometimes we have a homogeneous, a monolithic looking organization, and they look up and say, hey, we want to be engaged. It's not a checklist item. It's not, okay, we don't have a woman of color, so let's go get a woman of color, put her on the board of directors. That's when we mess up, when we do that checklist. Okay, we got one of those, we got one of these. Because again, it's not just about the race and the gender, it's about the talent. So you can go out and do that, And that, what if that person's not qualified? You grab a person who looks like this, you put them on your board so you can look diverse. But what if that person's not prepared for that? That person's gonna fail. And then the naysayers go, see, I told you that woman couldn't do this. I told you that person of color. I told you this person with disabilities couldn't do that job, and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, what's the solution though? What if you don't have anybody that's qualified at that point to fill that role? Well, that's when you need to start making sure you're mentoring people and you're preparing a pathway for them to one day fill those roles. And so those are the key things, I think, the leadership being involved and making sure there's not just a checklist type of programs and policies, but that you're really, truly taking it to heart and to make a difference in the organization. And I'm going to share, give opportunity for Charlene and Al to share some as well.
Well, I'm just going to jump in with something very quickly because my room is getting very bright and I'm going to be taken over by the sun in a few moments. But, you know, I would just certainly underscore what Marvin has said. And what I would add to that is, you know, being a Black female throughout my entire career, obviously, and a Black female executive, is I would really encourage companies to get away from what I call the onlys, right? So you know, where you are the only Black executive in the company, you're the only Black female executive in the company, that puts a huge burden on the only person. And it also creates something that all companies, I think, are worry about, which is tokenism. And it really minimizes the individual who's in the role, who is competent, who's doing a great job, but she's the only, or he's the only. So the assumption is that they're there because of their physical characteristics, not because of what they bring to the table. You know, and in research I've looked at, it says that, you know, it typically takes about 30% either of your leadership team, you know, of your population to be diverse for it to truly make a difference in your organization. So I won't repeat what Marvin has said, and I know Al has some great things to say, but you know, if nothing else, just stay away from the onlys, right? That's just not right. Al?
You know what, I can relate with everything that you're saying, and yeah, I would second that. Yeah, I think the only thing that, you know, from my perspective, you know, in terms of the elements of an effective D&I, it's, you know, I have to second, you know, the fact that your leadership really has to be involved from the top of the house, right? And they have to be committed to developing, promoting, you know, the folks, right? Because, you know, I love the fact that, you know, it's, if you only get that one person and they're not really qualified, you know, you're not only going to fail them, but you're going to fail everybody in the company who looks like them, and they're going to be afraid to do that. So there's a lot of danger in that, to me, right? So we got to make sure that we're more strategic to that approach. So from a small business perspective, you know, especially if you're just starting to change the culture, changing the culture of your company, you know, everybody says, oh yeah, we're just going to put some metrics to it and we're going to make it a requirement and we're off to the races. You know, I think that's probably, you know, when you think about what not to do, that's probably one of the ways to do that. And when we're looking at that level of material through that, you know, we're looking at dated material and we're making it a requirement, and nothing's sustainable when you make it a requirement, right? We all talk about diversity of thought, you know, but when you bring in unconscious bias and everything, it brings in different elements through those things. So to me, really having a safe, open environment for folks to share their diversity of thought, value it, act on it, and promote it, right? And what I mean by that is you got to have certain benchmarks within your company. If you truly are going to be engaging in this DEI initiative, you know, set the small targets. It could be people, it's folks that we're hiring, it's companies that we're going after, right? Just kind of challenge yourself to think differently and make sure that we're celebrating those little successes, right? Because after all, right, everybody needs motivations, including the business owners here on this call, and to find out why should this even be important to me? Why should I care? I think those are the primary reasons why I personally think that you know, you have to have an effective D&I initiative.
Thank you all. So what I took away from this, and for those of you who are taking notes like I am at home, it's not a checklist. set others up for failure. Stay away from the only. Leadership is a commitment. You have to be committed to this. And by being committed, be a mentor. If you don't have people who are ready for those leadership roles, bring them up, lift them up, and create a safe space and good environments and celebrate successes. And on that note, I want to celebrate the success of this panel and thank you all for being here today. I think that, again, Lisa noted at the beginning of our program that this was our first DEI committee event, and you all just were amazing, and we really appreciate you all being here. For those of you who would like to join the Chamber's DEI committee, we meet the fourth Wednesday of every month at 4 p.m. and you can email our president and CEO, Tony Howard, at thoward@loudounchamber.org. Thank everybody for being here, and I hope that you all learned as much as I did. And thank you, my esteemed panelists. You rocked it. I appreciate you. And that concludes our program.